Welcome to the African News Review podcast, where we cut through the noise and get to the truth. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and each week we are here to challenge the biases, prejudices, and misinformation in the Western press about Africa. Using historical context and contemporary insights, we set the record straight and reclaim the narrative. Tune in every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we uncover the real stories and reshape the conversations about Africa. This is the African News Review podcast, reclaiming Africa's narrative, one story at a time. Okay, greetings, and we are live. Welcome to African News Review. I am your host, Adesoji Iginla, and with me as usual is Aya Fubara Eneli Esq, host, Rethinking Freedom, author, yourself, Help Revolution, Kwanzaa is Celebration, and another book she will tell you about shortly, or the one that she doesn't want to release, which is welcome.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to be with you and be in conversation about things going on the continent that affect us all.
Yes. The good comrade is not here this week. He is pulled away on very important business, and he should be back next week. That said, this week has been filled with news as usual. We had your acting DOJ chief wanting to make himself permanent in the job. So you get to tell us what story is happening on the other world. Let me not bring my nosy Parker into your business.
There is certainly a lot that's going on. I'll start locally. We have no climate change. There's no issue with the climate, but we've had lots of flash floodings all around our area. It certainly has hit other parts of America as well. If you're in the chat and you've been affected by floods in your area, please cheer. So we've had catastrophic flash floodings.
Whoa.
And the governor of Texas has requested a presidential disaster declaration, which he will get because we are considered a red state, although we're only red because people who look like me don't go to vote. Whereas there are other states across the country who have requested assistance that quite frequently are being denied federal disaster assistance because they did not vote for the president. So it's interesting. You're supposed to be governing and protecting the entire country, America first, but really only when that aligns with your delusions of who should support you and still litigating the presidential election from 2020. Interestingly enough, Trump also had a press conference, which I did not watch. There's just not enough hours in the day. And if I had more hours, I still wouldn't have watched it. But it's bizarre, the fact that we don't think critically anymore. Just think about it. So the Democrats were in power, right, during the last presidential election. And they cheated so much that the Republicans ended up with the presidency, the House, and the Senate. Make that make sense. So, of course, there's only fraud when he loses, but no fraud when he wins. And then, of course, the other issue is that on the same ballot, if there was so much fraud, how come? So are you going to challenge all of the Republicans that also won on that ballot, or just Senator Warnock and Senator Ossoff and things like that? So people are just not thinking critically. But enough of that knucklehead. One of the things that I took away from the confirmation hearings for Todd Blanche, this issue with the settlement offer that the court has now rejected and is actually sanctioning
January 6th?
No. So Todd Blanche essentially authored the settlement agreement for the $1.76 billion slush fund for Trump that they could then also give to quote unquote January 6ers and so on, Proud Boys and so on and so forth. But also included in that was you can't go after him for his taxes for the period leading up to when the agreement was signed, right? And that includes his children and includes any corporations, organizations affiliated with Trump. So all the grifting, nothing gets audited. America first, but we won't pay our taxes, right? Well, so the court has basically said that settlement is null and void in the sense that you didn't have two adversarial parties. It's Trump suing a government where he heads, the entire government and makes truly the decisions what's going to happen, right? But there is a clause in that settlement agreement that had been signed by both parties, so it's a contract that said this contract can only be rescinded in writing. And so when you hear Todd Blanche saying, oh, the slush fund is dead, there's no agreement, but refusing to put it in writing, that is because they are leaving the door open to still be able to implement at
the
least
other part.
that part of the taxes where, no, this guy, you can never come back and audit him for any of that. So those just little nuances. I mean, people are trying to live their daily lives and pay bills and things like that. So we may not all be paying attention to the minutia, but bottom line is that we have, in my opinion, and I am entitled to my opinion under the U.S. Constitution, let me put it out that way, you have a mafia warlord in the White House. He's not just a 34-time convicted felon. He's not just someone who coddles pedophiles and is sexually adjudicated. Is an adjudicated sexual offender himself. He's a man that is without a moral compass. In my opinion, definitely a sociopath. And the fact that so many do not have the spine to stand up within the Republican Party, so many voters either don't have the bandwidth to think for themselves or are so blinded by their racism that they will go along with anything, even if it's going to kill them, is truly an unfortunate state for us to be in. However, those of us who have ears to hear, eyes to see, a mind to comprehend and think should really be asking ourselves on a daily basis, what am I doing to bring about the change that I want to see? And if I'm just reading in my house, which is good, but I am not talking to anybody, I'm not funding any organizations, I am not trying to convince other people, my dear friend, you too are part of the problem. So I'll stop there because I could go on with so much more news, but I'll stop there for now.
Okay. In the UK, we did put out warrants of arrest for two brothers. People on the chat might know who I'm talking about, the Tate brothers. We've sort of nabbed them in Miami, Florida, and they're currently awaiting extradition to the United Kingdom for, let's just say, sexual assaults, rape allegations, and act of accessing illegal materials of a sexual nature. So that said, this week, we also had the coming to power of Andy Burnham, who becomes the new Labour leader, effectively the UK Prime Minister. That will be codified this week when he would then address the House, go to King Charles and do all the good stuff and then begin work. But that said, the likes of the Reform Party, of which Farage is the leader, is asking that he calls a general election. I don't know what difference that would make, but that's his right, so he's allowed to do that. Other than that, the news is pretty lame this week. And besides, we're almost in holiday week. The kids have gone on holiday. They're going to be out for 6 weeks. And so that's it. So this week on African News Review, we have curated some stories. So let's begin. Where should we begin from? Let's go to Kenya, my favorite place in the world. I don't know why, but there's something about Kenya that just... So it's about...
Don't get me speculating. You don't want me speculating.
Okay, speculate. So killing continues. According to The Guardian, killing continues on Del Monte farm in Kenya, family says, after G4S hired for security. So the exclusive is 3 men were killed in accidents over the past year, involving G4S guards who replaced in-house team after previous deaths. So, bereaved families and politicians have raised alarm about continued killings on Del Monte Pineapple Farm in Kenya, despite the company's hiring a British security firm to replace its in-house security team after previous deaths were exposed by The Guardian. The multinational food company appointed G4S to guide the farm, which is estimated to cover 40 square kilometers, the area of a small city, after The Guardian detailed allegations of brutal assaults and killing of people suspected of trespassing on its land. Kenyan police has been working with G4S to guide this site. The three men, including two brothers, were killed in separate incidents over the past year, allegedly involving G4S incidents. So, you've read the story. What's your initial take?
Might need to resign from being a part of ANR. No, seriously, like preparing for these stories, like when I'm done reading them, and yes, we should all be aware of what's going on. Like I need to take time to just like bring my blood pressure down, meditate, so on and so forth. And then I get myself calm. And then we get onto ANR, and then you bring these stories up, and then I just feel okay. So let's start at the very beginning. A very good place to start. When we read these articles and, they only have so many words, maybe it's a 750 word, maybe a 600, 500 word article. I understand that there's a lot that, even if they wanted to, would just be left on the cutting board. But then also maybe they're putting this information out and saying, those of you who are interested, go dig a little deeper, which many of us don't because, we barely listen to the news to begin with or read the news. But let's start with G4S. G4S is a London headquartered private security multinational. It is one of the largest security contractors in the world. And we're talking about Kenya. And so when we talk about any of these African stories, like it's impossible to escape colonialism and neocolonialism in every single one of these stories.
Yep.
You still see the extraction of resources, whether it's land, whether it's minerals, whether it's produce, whether it's human beings. And then you see these outside forces, patter rollers, right?
Yeah.
Slave. Listen, they're still operating as though nothing has changed. So this is quote unquote an independent nation. And of course, if Comrade Alamadi was here, he would say there are no independent African nations. But a security force contractor headquartered outside of that country is in that country guarding a business that has been set up with land that the Kenyan government essentially has just given because the lease agreements are ridiculous when you look at the terms of it. And then what you find is, and the article covers this, they're working with the state apparatus as well in terms of their security forces. And so you have the state protecting capital, protecting foreign capital.
Yeah.
Now, the article didn't break it all down this way, so I had to go do a deeper dive. But you're basically looking at, if you can go by their figures, because one of the things the article does say is that they have been hiding their profits.
Yep.
That they taking profits out through their other partners so that they minimize how much on paper they made, right? Which impacts, obviously, the taxes that they pay. But by any estimation, Del Monte is paying 7 to 10% of their profits in taxes. Meanwhile, the tax rate for corporations in Kenya is 30%.
Yeah.
While also enjoying the security
the state
provided by the state.
Taxpayers and taxpayers.
And then the other part of it is this land and what is disputed between the amount of land that has been given to this company versus the land that had been set aside supposedly for the outgrowers. This would be the indigenous people. And how that land was also absorbed into what the company now has. Because the government, although they had an idea to make sure that they were supporting the outgrowers, it wasn't a well thought out idea. This was in 1965, and so it fell through shortly thereafter. And Del Monte has absorbed all that land. So when you're talking about young men being killed, let's say because they were stealing pineapples. And why would they be stealing pineapples? Because they're trying to make a living.
Yeah.
But if they are stealing, quote unquote, I'm just saying, let's agree with them that they were stealing.
Okay.
That they are stealing from a place that used to be part of their ancestral land. And they are now closed off from a legal way to make an income and to make a living. But then a life for a pineapple?
That's the question.
That's what we're doing now?
That's the question.
And what it doesn't say fully in this article is it talks about the senator, God bless him, who is saying, hey, there needs to be a deeper inquiry. But there was also another report that talked about human rights violations, but I've not been able to find what exactly those violations were. So we're talking about the deaths of 3 people, 3 men, 3 young men. But what are these other human rights violations? Because someone doesn't just have to die, right? Who else have you maimed? They didn't die. Who else have you intimidated? Who else have you raped? What else is going on in that area? And what has been the benefit to the people in that area? Especially when they are paying such a small percentage in taxes. I wish here, as a business owner, I could get away with 7 to 10%. Of course, Trump and his friends have figured out how to get away with 0%. But so very, very, very concerning on all levels. Now, this is happening in Kenya, where President Ruto has said, we have the answer to our problems. And I agree with him. And then at the same time, I'll also say, and then, sir, with your power and your platform, how are you empowering your own people to solve our problems instead of continuing to protect these multinational corporations that don't mean us any good? And then again, here we are. Like, I don't know about you guys. I love pineapples, but I can only make so many things to eat from pineapple. I mean, is Kenya importing food?
Yeah.
But spending all of this land on growing pineapples for a largely European market? Just things to think about.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Just taking a quick break here on the African News Review podcast, but don't go anywhere. If you're enjoying our deep dive into the real stories behind the headlines, make sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Every Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern, we're here to debunk the myths and bring you the truth about Africa. Want to help spread the word? Share this podcast with your friends and leave us a review. It goes a long way in helping others discover the real Africa. Without further ado, let's get back to setting the record straight. I mean, you mentioned the fact that Kenya does that. That is Kenya's economy model. I don't know how. Again, we cannot divorce colonialism from the present day issues in Kenya. In 1895, 1896, a company, the British East Indian Company East Africa Company got the right to land in Kenya. It used to be known as the Rift Valley. It's now called the White Highlands. So displaced the people, principally the Kikuyus, but not exclusively.
There were no people there.
Yeah, principally the Kikuyus, but not exclusively the Kikuyus, were displaced from their land, and in their place, veterans from the First World War were then given parcels of land.
And labor camps set up.
And exactly.
And the indigenous people forced to work. Yes.
Forced to work. And when they kicked up a storm, which is what is now known as the Mau Mau uprising, they created, they pull up the playbook they've done in South Africa, which is the origin of the concentration camps, and created about 300 concentration camps across Kenya in order to contain the uprising. They captured...
You mean like Auschwitz?
Worse than Auschwitz. So much so that there was a case a couple of years ago about the kind of tortures people were having to endure in the Kenyan camps. And principally, what's the title of the book again? Stolen... I remember. It's a book written by Ian Cobain. And it documents that everyone that went through those camps had a file. But what did the British do when leaving? They created a giant bonfire. Burned the ones they can't carry. The ones they can carry, they put them in cinder blocks, concretized it, and dropped it in the middle of the ocean, never to be seen again. But they did bring some files back. Those files were then the subject of a case, which the survivors of the Mau Mau then won a historical victory in the courts, and they got a degree of compensation in a light, but never got the land back. So back to Del Monte. So Del Monte is a part of a series of organizations that have been able to build upon that displacement of people, creating, like you say, just imagine a company has a land, 40 square kilometers. People just imagine driving for 40 kilometers in square, 40 kilometers. Again, that is giving us an idea of how large this farm is. And then the fact that in the article it says the company made about $180 million, $100 million a year, but pays the workers just about 280 pounds in a year. Make that make sense. And then we're supposed to be independent. So we get a sense that this is an ongoing issue. We've tackled the story of Alice Wajuru, the lady that was killed and stuffed in a septic tank, which the extradition case is still ongoing in the United Kingdom. Again, all of this happened in Kenya. Also, the British Army training camp, UK, Batuk, in Nayuki, is also the subject of another infraction with regards to Kenyans. So the question is, at what point does Kenya then decide all of this arrangement is not in our best interest? Bearing in mind, they just signed another agreement with France, mirroring what the British are doing in Nayuki as well. So I don't know how we're going to solve this problem, but for some reason, independence is not cutting out to be what it's supposed to be, with particular reference to Kenya. To a lesser degree, some other part of the continent, but we're talking about Kenya for now. Any other thoughts with regards to
just put it in just so that we maybe can get a better sense of how much land we're talking about here. I think math don't fail me now. So I think 40,000 square kilometers would be roughly
40 square kilometers.
40 square kilometers.
Yeah.
So we're looking at like 15, that would be like 15 square miles. So we're looking at...
That's 2 New Yorks.
Yeah. We're looking at over 900,000 acres, I think, something along those lines. But someone can do the math.
Yeah, but that's 2 New York cities. New York is I think New York is 19 miles. 19 square miles. So that's 2 New Yorks. That's 2 New Yorks.
That a foreign entity can walk in and with the support of the government and then be given tax abatements and security and all of that. And since independence, we have not figured out how to, with our growing population and the percentage of young people who are unemployed, we have not figured out how to do this for ourselves. All right.
It begs the question. And for people who want to dig deeper with regards to the story of Kenya, you could read Caroline Elkin's Imperial Reckoning. Brilliant book, but you might need to go for therapy after because she chronicles so much stuff in there. So, yeah, we don't shy from it. We read everything. Yeah. So that said, if this is your first time here, do like, share, subscribe, and do all the good stuff. And we continue. So we go to West Africa. This time to the
One last thing. I think it's really important that we call our freedom fighters what they call themselves. And so they call themselves the Kenya Land and Freedom Army.
Yes.
Kenya Land and Freedom Army, because words matter. We do not have to call them what the colonizers called them.
Yeah.
Yes. They were freedom.
And it was led by the great Field Marshal Dedan Kimathi.
Yeah.
So that's with that, we go to our next story, which comes from the other side of Africa. And it's a story that will probably resonate a lot, especially in this day and age of online cultures. So it comes again from The Guardian. After historical World Cup success, why does Cape Verde still grapple with identity issues? The island is a shining light for Africa, this year's continent, but its modern relationship with continental solidarity and oneness is far more complex. What do we mean by that? After World Cup debutant, Cabo Verde became the smallest country to reach the tournament's knockout stages. Coach Batistuta was understandably emotional about his squad's historical trajectory. And he says, we represent our island, but we also represent Africa, the 56-year-old said in a pre-match press conference. It's a source of immense pride. But some would argue, some Cabo Verde identify as Portuguese, not African, presenting their skin color and that island were uninhabited before Europeans came as proof of their origin, said Antonio Tavares, a veteran choreographer and director of the Cultural Center in the city of Midelo. And Tavares is dark-skinned in the country of mostly, I can't believe I'm reading this, in a country of mostly light-skinned people and deep-rooted colorism, a lingering legacy of being a Portuguese colony for more than 500 years, including a period in which one of the most largest marketplaces for enslaved people. I'll just read this last part. Our mentality is very Luso-tropicalism. Nadir Sousa, professor of sociology at the University of Santiago, said, referring to a philosophy espoused by Brazilian sociologist Gilberto Ferrer. The Portuguese, Ferrer claimed, were better colonizer because their warm climate made them humane enough to be friendly with the enslaved to the point of race mixing. Oh my God. Yes. Good.
Are you done?
Yeah, I'm done.
To the point of race mixing, what is that point? Haven't they been raping and sleeping with us across the wherever?
But they like
whether
us.
Whether it was in the tropical region or in the dead of winter. What are you talking about?
Yeah, but they like us enough to sleep with us, which the others didn't, according to
the others didn't. So then how is there race mixing all across the Americas?
Well, it's part of the Cope culture.
Please.
So,
okay. Yeah.
So the question to you would be, now we've gone into Cape Verde, a couple of islands off the west coast of Africa, for those who want to know where it is. The question would be, at what point do we, as Africans, because we consider them Africans, they're nearest to the continent of Africa, further than the Caribbean or what have you, at what point do we as Africans contend with the lasting problems of the transatlantic slave trade and also colonialism?
Ask the question again?
Yeah. I said, at what point do we contend with the lasting impact of colonialism and, before that, slavery, transatlantic slave trade on the African continent?
Well, I think we're constantly contending with that. I mean, every single story that we've covered, at least that I've been a part of, we've been contending with that.
Okay.
The fact that you and I are speaking in this language right now is a contention.
Part of the contention. Yeah, true.
With this history.
Mm.
And it's a history that is a thread that runs through every single story that we cover. Any story we've covered on Africa,
Mhm.
somehow you can trace the issues,
Mhm.
unfortunately, back to our encounter and our, if you want to call it, relationship with these colonizers, with these people that it boggles my mind how you can be so set on hating a group of people. And we are an obsession for them and
Okay.
have been for centuries, in my opinion. But anyway, getting back specifically to this article,
Yep.
one has to actually go and read up on Cabo Verde because you understand the role that the Portuguese gave their light-skinned Cabo Verde
Comprende.
middlewomen, if you will. So what you see within the Portuguese Empire
Mm.
is members of this lighter preferred group, right, quote unquote, mixed race heritage, serving in an administrative middle tier capacity
Yep.
within the Portuguese Empire.
Mhm.
And so members of people from Cabo Verde were actually sent as civil servants to other Portuguese African colonies in Angola, in Mozambique, in Guinea-Bissau. And their job was to be the African elites looking out for the interests of their masters, while having a hue closer to the people that they were essentially colonizing on the part of their masters. And you see that a huge share of Cabo Verdeans actually live abroad. They live in the US, Netherlands, Portugal. What's so interesting is that just by happenstance, 2 weeks ago, I was watching a documentary, possibly because of FIFA and their advancement in the World Cup, where they were talking about a community in Massachusetts. I think it was Massachusetts. But the federal government did to them the exact same thing they did to the African American communities. They came and they put a
One way.
highway right through their community and destroyed the community. And it was a family that still remained in the area that was talking about what it used to be and what kind of, community they had and how much it had thrived at one point before the federal government basically came in and destroyed it, which is exactly the same thing that they have done to African American communities all across this country. And so any people of African descent, whether you want to claim it or not, whether you're like Rubio, now you're Spanish, you don't have any African roots, is you have to understand that this deep-seated hatred towards us will not bypass you.
Mm.
You are not going to get, you might feel like you can get into positions, it's Secretary of State,
There's a position.
temporarily, but sooner or later they tell you who you are in their eyes. Ask Colin Powell if he could speak from the ancestral realm. At one point, the Republicans, there's that golden child black man. And when they thought he could possibly be interested in running for president, they're like, nah, you still an N. And then they wanted to bring up issues with regarding the mental health of his wife and so on and so forth. So what I would encourage, our audience to do is to read Amílcar Cabral directly.
Yeah.
And the other thing we can do is to support the Resistance Museum, which is located where they used to have the Tarrafal camp, which was a place where they tortured people who look like me in a way that, and there were other dissidents and other, people that they felt were troublemakers were sent to a camp there. But Cabo Verde actually played a huge role in the slave trade, with thousands and thousands going through there. And what we see is that their anti-blackness still exists. In fact, there was a story about at their airport that they were profiling Nigerian and Senegalese travelers, even though they are supposedly an African nation. So we've got a lot of work to do, calling these things out, making people look personally at how they're functioning. The colorism, even within their own families, is a good step. But reading Amílcar Cabral and studying his work would also be highly recommended.
Yeah, I mean, there is nothing more to add. You talked about the Tavares camp, which was used to torture prisoners during Salazar's regime in Portugal. And it was largely known as a concentration camp. It's not just a torture chamber. But then again, Cabo Verde was used, in their words, as a seasoning spot for enslaved people, which meant they were able to, quote unquote, weed out people that they considered might be troublemakers and kept them on Sao Tome Principe, which is the first plantation on the African continent, as opposed to sending them to the Americas. So for those who might want to read more with regards to Cabo Verde and Guinea-Bissau, you could read Amílcar Cabral's Return to the Source, which is that contains all his thinking and what have you. But to understand the man itself, you can read his short history by Ohio University. So, that said, do you have any other last Cabo Verde thoughts?
Not at this time. But again, as we talk about getting beyond neocolonialism, all of these countries really need to look at what benefits they think they gain from continuing to be attached to their colonizers, and to understand, just as they were manipulating, extracting, dehumanizing you before, not much has changed. But at the same time, I'm going to say, shout out to the generosity of the African spirit, because in spite of the anti-Blackness in this area, when they were in the World Cup, Africans across the diaspora were embracing. We're Africans. We're embracing them. Like, we are all one. And they benefited from, enjoyed that embrace as well. And so we need to get beyond these arbitrary lines and these hierarchies of color that have been created, and understand that we win when we all come together.
Okay. So, Pan-Africanism, we will celebrate. And so, I would have loved the comrade to be here with regards to the next story, which comes from Uganda. And it's that 4 farmers, and this one comes from Radio France International. It is that Ugandan farmers take Total Energy pipeline to UK court. 4 Ugandan farmers filed a case against the East African crude oil pipeline, EACOP, at the UK High Court on Tuesday, seeking to have Ugandan constitutional and environmental and climate law applied to EACOP, the UK registered company financing the project. And it says, due to beginning operating in 2027, EACOP would become the world's largest heated pipeline, running through 1,443 kilometers from Ugandan oil fields near Lake Albert to the Tanzanian port of Tanga. EACOP has already faced several lawsuits in France, where a Paris court had ruled last week that the Total Energy was liable for emissions generated by its client, a decision hailed as a landmark for climate law. The claimants argue the project will affect more than 100,000 through land acquisition, and that it crosses critical freshwater systems and protected habitats. The NGO said it believed this is the first time Ugandan's environmental law has been brought before a foreign court, describing EACOP as a global test case for whether new fossil fuels mega project can still be forced through despite mounting legal, financial, climate, and community opposition. And, we've dealt with stories like this before, namely the one that happened previously in Nigeria, which is constantly going through the courts. How do you see, let me frame this question. How do you square the independence of Africa with the idea that in order to force a foreign company to do the right bidding, you have to sue them in their country of origin, as opposed to...
You said it all.
Oh, okay.
You've said it all. How do I have a trespasser on my land? And let me just say in my house, maybe people can relate to that. Someone broke into your own house, but then you go back to the house where that person lives to ask them to oversee any kind of justice over whether this person had the right to break into your house and extract whatever it is that they extract. Like,
How does that make sense?
so again, are we independent? Are we sovereign nations? What are we? Exactly. So some of you may have watched the episode of Women in Resistance that we did on Elizabeth of Toro, which deals with this whole Ugandan area, right? So let's talk about 100. How many thousands of feet?
It's 1,443 kilometers, 897 miles long pipeline.
And it's going
It's a heated pipeline as well.
Hold on. It's heated, right?
Yeah.
And it's going from where to where?
It's going from the Ugandan oil fields running across the country to a port in another country, Tanzania, called Tanga.
Why is it going to the port?
Because Uganda is landlocked.
Okay. Yeah. But what are they trying to do at the port with it?
I'll take it to be refined somewhere else.
Okay. So this is going to be like our crude oil. We're not building a refinery. And these people might actually fight Dangote, who is trying to build a refinery in that area. Yes.
Yeah.
But we're not building any schools, no hospitals, no universities, no infrastructure. But we have the money and our governments are going to back. And 800 and how many miles?
197 miles of pipeline.
Yes. And then let's talk about where the area this is going to run through, right? So the oil sits under, Jesus help me. Maybe not Jesus, not white Jesus. It sits under a lake that is now called Lake Albert.
Yeah, Lake Albert.
Because, the people who used to live there didn't have the sense to name it anything. We needed the colonizers to come in and name it. Okay?
Yeah.
It's in the Bonyoro Kingdom region. That geography matters because the Bonyoro region has its own distinct and much older colonial land grievance that is separate from this one. So we've got to go back to 1900. And again, go and watch the Women in Resistance episode on Elizabeth of Toro, she's actually still living. So the 1900 Buganda Agreement carved 19,600 square miles. And these people are just playing with us, right?
Yeah,
Think of the land we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Now, you all know that 60% of the arable land in the world exists in Africa. But these people are going to poison as much of it as they can to extract what it is they need. But let me carry on.
Yeah.
So they carved out 19,600 square miles of territory between Kabaka and Buganda. Now, if all of this is sounding confusing to you, go and get Adesoji's Africa Illuminated. It's got a map of Africa. You can kind of start tracing, understanding where this country is as we're talking about it, right? So what they did was when they carved out that land, these are the so-called lost counties of Buyaga and Bugangazi. They removed them from the Bunyoro Kingdom with British colonial assistance. And then what Britain did was they used Buganda as a sub-imperial partner, kind of like the Cabo Verde.
Yeah.
To help subdue and administer the rest of the protectorate. It's always divide and conquer.
Yeah.
And so Bunyoro, which was once the dominant regional power, now was subjugated under Buganda's rise and had to pay the territorial price for British conquest, right? So there's still that issue over that land that was taken, that ancestral land that was taken from one group, right? And then that carried over into a political fight for decades after independence. This is the way we keep you all at each other's throats, right?
Yeah.
And then there was a 1964 referendum that, tried to massage things. So when we look at EACOP, or however you pronounce them, EACOP.
Yeah, EACOP.
When you look at that, the people in that area are making the same criticism as the original 1900 land settlement, because this pipeline runs over or under land belonging to an estimated 100,000 plus people who have so far received only limited or inadequate compensation. Now, supposedly 7,000 people have been resettled, but we've had this conversation before. What does resettlement mean? Where are you taking me to? Who had that land that you're now taking me to? Right?
Yep.
What do I do with the remains of my ancestors because when you're resettling me, I can't take it all with me.
True.
So what does that mean exactly? So when we look at, who's Total Energy, who's EACOP, their shareholders at Total Energy, 62%. Then the Uganda National Oil Company and the Tanzania Petroleum Development Corporation have 15% each. And then China State Oil Company has 8%.
Hello?
So 70% outsiders, and then you have Uganda and Tanzania. So this is, again, a continuation of what we've been talking about. Colonial extraction, they still hold the majority. And then you have a few well-positioned African elites who really are the ones tapped into the 30%, which may or may not, a lot of times, does not benefit the people who are actually being displaced. And then whoever thinks that you can run a pipeline that long and that you're not going to have leaks, you're not going to have environmental devastation, that you're not going to change the biodiversity in the area, a heated pipe. What does that do
to the
Yes.
to the ecosystem? Yeah.
And again, like you said, we've got to go to the UK to go litigate this, which, by the way, we're going to spend more money paying UK attorneys, paying transportation, paying whatever, and may or may not get justice. But the pipe is going through our land. Now, if you did not have African accomplices, this would all stop immediately.
Of course.
So here we go.
Yeah, we've seen this play over and over again. When you talked about the resettlement of people recall the resettling of the people on the Chaguan Islands, where basically the UK seized the people off the land, put them on a ferry, took them to Mauritius. The Americans came in, got the land, concrete over graveyards, schools, and what have you. And it's now a military base. The military base now is a subject of litigation, of renegotiating lease and what have you. But then it just goes to show the aspect of colonialism that most people do not talk about. The displacement of people, the loss of culture, language, a whole way of life. But then, we're supposed, in the words of some people, we're supposed to be grateful for colonialism. If not, we'll still be hanging from trees. Whoever said that.
So two things I want to point out. I know we have to move to the next stories.
Yeah.
First of all, what they're trying to do with this pipeline and EACOP and the promises they're making, we've seen it before in recent memory. So there's a Chad-Cameroon
pipeline
precedent with this, right? So there was a Chad-Cameroon pipeline that was 1,070 kilometers, and it was completed in 2000. It was partly financed by the World Bank, specifically because there was a promise made by the multinational corporation of revenue transparency. And the only reason they have to make that promise is because they never are transparent with the revenue that they're extracting from us. But anyway, revenue transparency poverty reduction safeguards. And we talked about the oil pollution in Nigeria. Those communities have not seen any poverty safeguards, but these are the promises being made. They've tried to sell this pipeline in Uganda with the same language that the Chad Cameroonian pipeline was sold on, which was economic transformation, safeguards, local benefit sharing. We will protect biodiversity. Within a few years, Chad's government redirected African accomplices, redirected all the oil revenue towards military spending. There were no poverty reduction safeguards. There were no schools. There were no hospitals built for the people, right? They did not see an increase in their wages. And so then the World Bank withdrew from the arrangement in 2008.
Now living with a pipeline that's not generating anything.
And then EACOP's backers are making these same promises about local content, environmental mitigation, revenue transparency, so on and so forth. But that's why people are fighting back. The people are fighting back and saying, stop EACOP, right? And so Barclays, their Credit Suisse location, whatever, they are withdrawing support at this point, just based on some of the protests that are happening. So we'll see where this goes. But the bottom line is they make these promises, they put these things in place, they displace people, and we are worse off for it. The other part that I wanted to mention is, as recently as 2021, Uganda forced 54 independent NGOs working on freedom of expression and human rights to close down and cease operations.
Why?
That's the direct political environment in which EACOP
wants to operate in.
Yes. So there's this whole intimidation and arrest. It was mentioned very briefly, but that is what's happening right now. And again, who's the president of Uganda? We've had this conversation many times. This should not come as a shock to us. You connect all the dots here. We've got Museveni. You've got police overreach. You have a documented, the documented pattern of civic space closure. So, and of course, the enrichment of Museveni and those who are in his circle. So, where is this going to go, and how is this going to impact us 20, 30, 40, 50 years from now, when people are now being killed because they're trying to tap into the oil to make some little sale to be able to live? But here we are.
Yep, the same Yoweri Museveni who said the problem with African leaders is that they stay too long. That was said in 1992, considering he was there from 1986, and he's still there in 2026. Interesting. Yeah, so we're almost at the end of African News Review. Next week, Saturday, it will be another episode of Griot and Books, and we're honored to have Dr. Michael Henderson to sit with us as we go through one of Francis Fanon's famous texts, Black Skins, White Mask. And so that will be at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time next Saturday, the 25th of July, 2026, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's Frantz Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask. And that will be with our guests. That will be myself and Miss Aya would sit and discuss how Frantz Fanon's text today, that is 2026, what does it mean? I mean, we've talked a little about it, colorism, colonialism, the impact it has on us. So we continue to move. Yes. And in the course of the week, we're also going to be on Women and Resistance, but this time it will be a recorded version, but you will still catch it all the same. It will be Agatha Williama, and that's at 7 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Same.
I really encourage people to come and listen to this one. This is a leader, the first and only female prime minister of Rwanda. And if you ever heard of the genocide in Rwanda,
1994.
This will be a great episode to tune into because we're also going to go a little bit into the history of that genocide.
Yeah. So that said, and next month we have some special guests for you, but we'll keep that on that wraps until next month.
Some really special guests.
Yes. You would really, really, really embrace them. So let's go to, again, if this is your first time here, do like, share, subscribe, you click the like button, and let's get the numbers up. That said, our next story is about education. And Sister mentioned something earlier, which was about the issue of extraction. Is this a story of extraction or the fact that what Fanon will say, problem with the metropole and those on the periphery not knowing their place? So the news comes from Radio France International, and its students in Cameroon protest new financial requirements for French visas. Dozens of people took to the streets outside the French embassy in Yaoundé this week to protest new rules that require Cameroonian nationals to demonstrate the means to pay tuition fees in full before they can obtain a student visa for France. Protesters say the policy will make studying in France impossible for many people who already have places at French institutions for the coming academic year. Dozens of students attended the march on Tuesday after the Cameroon branch of France's public agency for international students, Campus France, announced 9th of July that visa applicants must now provide proof of full payment of the tuition fees or demonstrate they possess the corresponding funds. The measure came after several students in Cameroon had already submitted their application. Were asked for 25,000 euros, including processing fees, a sum that in reality families cannot cover. He said, speaking on condition of anonymity, one parent said the new requirements was a harsh blow to his son who is already enrolled to start at a private university in Lyon. The cost for him is about 14,500 euros. We were due to pay in installments until May, but we are fully prepared, having paid 3,005 euro registration fee required by the university, he said. So, question is, we're in 2026. What is the deal with going abroad to go and study? Considering this country got independence in 1960. Specifically with French. I mean, the same thing happened. Let's put everything on the table. The same thing happened in the UK 2 years ago, where people wanted to study from Nigeria, where effectively said, if you cannot show full payment, we're not going to give you a visa. And I think it's the same thing now in the United States, if I'm not mistaken. So question is, when do we read the writing on the wall and decide? I mean, if you're paying 25,000 euros in an African country, that is, I might just be facetious, but I would love to hear your take.
Hey, listen, we can make this really simple. I don't believe that we need to go abroad to get educated. But again, talking about the impact of colonialism and neocolonialism, we did have universities, and our ways of learning and transferring information before the colonizers came. Many of our institutions were destroyed, right?
Yeah.
During that process.
Yeah.
And then what they did was ensure that they did not invest in education in quote unquote these colonies. We just needed you to harvest what we told you to harvest. So we were just going to take your bodies and transport you somewhere else to work for us. And we're not trying to develop your minds, in quotes,
For liberation.
or create institutions of education, higher learning, anything.
Mhm.
So we find where, there were quite a number of African nations that when they gained their independence, maybe had one university and some none. And then at the same time, particularly with the Francophone countries, or as they were called, African countries that were colonized by France and Portugal, and whatever their relationship was with their colonizer, you see this idea of, particularly with the
French.
Yes. We are still, citizens of France, and we go and we get our education and so on and so forth. And what you have seen is since quote unquote independence, African nations, for a variety of reasons, just not investing in education in the way that we should. Some of it would be through these loans and these IMF and structural adjustment programs that actually prevented countries from investing in any social programs. And so when you're talking about a country with so many young people, as I've shared before, although I was born in this country, I did go back to Nigeria for after I was 3 years old. And to get into what we call secondary school, which would be considered middle school and high school here in the United States of America, we had to take exams. Like you didn't just, I passed elementary school, so I'm going on to secondary school. I'm going on to the 7th grade. No, we had to pass exams where there were cutoff points depending on the kind of school you were trying to go to. Whether you were going to a school funded by the federal government, those ones had stricter stricter requirements. So you had to be a better quote unquote student, whether you're going to the schools at the state level. And then I don't know if there was anything underneath the state level. But what I'm saying is you had fewer spots for people to go to 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grades than you did students. And then that bottleneck got even tighter from high school to university because we all had to take, what was it? The Joint Admission Matriculation Board exam. JAM.
Yeah.
And depending on what your major is, you had to hit a certain score. And different universities had different thresholds. And so you could be a really good student. You passed high school, but you did not get that score, or there were so many of you who got that score that they still had a cutoff at some point because they only have so many positions at the university level. So you could be brilliant and still not have gotten into university. So what you then see, even back in my time, which was, 30 some years ago, people looking for other opportunities for their children to get an education because we understood, as Malcolm X would say, that education is a passport to your future. Now, not just getting a degree, education. And so what you also saw was these multinational corporations like Shell. In the case of my father, Shell actually had him take an exam in Nigeria. Well, a bunch of them take exams, and they took the best and the brightest, and they gave them scholarships to go to Europe and some to the U.S. to study. But they were doing that because they needed to create a middle class. They needed to create the middle people who would continue to run the country as they wanted it run, even if they weren't physically present there. So I say all of that to say that the reason why you still see so many African students seeking to go, quote unquote, as we say, abroad for college, has its, you have to trace it right back to the vestiges of colonialism. And then the fact that our countries, our governments still have not found a way to adequately invest in education. So when we're saying, the Africa is the future and we are the youngest country, youngest continent, and now all these young people are saying we need opportunities, and we simply have not created the infrastructure to be able to absorb those young people. Having said that, let's look at how much African nations are subsidizing education outside of Africa. Doing some research, African students pay an estimated $3 to $5 billion a year in tuition across Europe. So this is money that could have been used to build up our own institutions, but we're infusing that money in Europe, which allows them to continue to expand their infrastructure, to hire lecturers and professors, which, by the way, include a lot of
Africans.
A lot of Africans as well, right? Now, I gave that number for Europe. For the U.S., African students contribute, it's estimated, between 2.7 and 2.9 billion is what they're paying in tuition. So let's get back to the story. This idea of you cannot go to a university from Cameroon. By the way, they're not making it uniform across all the countries. Like this is specific to Cameroon, but as they mentioned, Ivory Coast has a different set of guidelines, so on and so forth. But they're saying you can't come unless you have proof that you have all the money to pay your tuition in full. Now, I don't know about the rest of you. When I went to college, I worked and paid as I went.
Yeah.
I had work study. I worked. Even in law school, I was working sometimes 3 jobs, which was insane because it was like, okay, got a little scholarship here, got a little this here, and then I'm working to help cover my other expenses. So if someone had said, you can't start unless you have all of that money up front, that wouldn't have worked for me and my family. And we were here in the United States, but we were paying as we went along, so to speak. And so you see this anti-Blackness showing up in policies all across the Western Hemisphere. And of course, we see that in Africa as well. We talked about South Africa last week, but different ways, without mentioning race per se, that restrictions are being put on Africans and how we're able to move around the world and what we're able to access. And of course, if you can have a less educated African populace, then they're also going to be easier to maybe re-enslave?
Yeah.
I don't know. So, just a number of solutions. Let's continue to look for ways to, let's continue to have these conversations. Let's continue to look for ways to support students in the countries in which they're from. But to the extent that, yes, there are certain degrees or, higher levels that students need to come here and gain the knowledge to go back home, let's kind of look at the model that China used in educating its populace, but then bringing them back home to problem solve, as opposed to just coming and staying here. Now, my parents got educated and went back to Nigeria. I'm still here, but I'm still trying to work wherever I can across the continent, even as I work here as well. So lots of things for us to think about on this one.
So, I brought up the story just to highlight 2 things, really. And 2 of them you've touched on, which is normally the brain drain. Because not only will those students go, the possibility of them coming back, it's minuscule. They're highly unlikely to do so because they would want fair wages, fair, the lifestyle. But there is now an insidious part of it in the sense that when they do go abroad, they also become the African elites that the quote unquote foreign powers send back home to undermine.
But then they also become the immigrants that may sleep with the white woman and
hey, can I help who you love? But so they would
and lead to the browning of our nations.
Exactly. So they won't, there's that aspect of it. But the more incredulous part is the part you mentioned, the money. This is money that most of these countries need. But somehow, because we have an elite class, that money is channeled towards Europe, keeping Europe and the United States, keeping their system going while ours falls into the doldrums. And so it's like you said, it's a position we have to keep watching, talking about. And if you know someone in power, let them.
But here's the thing that I would say people can advocate, because the timing of this is crazy. So what the article covers is some of these students have already paid the first part of the fee, saying, hey, I accept you've granted me admission to your university. You typically have to pay a fee to secure that spot.
Yep.
Some of them have paid that fee. So if you now deny them their student visa, are those universities, those institutions required to return that money? Because I'll tell you, with my kids going to college, typically it says non-refundable. So you waited until after these people understand what these cycles are. You waited until after people would have gotten their admission letters,
and then
would
you
have
lock them
paid,
in.
Accepted the offers and already made a down payment, so to speak, to now say, oh, no, if you don't have all the money, you can't go, which means that if they really can't go, they have also lost out on that income that they've already paid, that tuition they've already paid. which is enriching your institutions without having to provide any services. So this was foul, the way they did it. Does every country decide, get to decide who they want there? Yes, and so on. But then if I were Cameroon, I'm going to be like, okay, France, which multinational corporations do you have in our country? Maybe, hey, take a page out of Trump's book. I mean, we tariff you, or you pay extra taxes, or you provide the scholarships for our kids. But you don't get to come here and extract and make money off of us while your home country is making life making life harder for us.
Wow. Yeah.
So these are all the ways they steal from us. They knew what they were doing.
Yeah, so France is in a precarious situation.
Now, they'll take us to play football for them, but we can't come and study.
No. Stay in your country. France is in a precarious situation with regards to its finances. So anyway, any which way can, we'll make the money.
Where is Mbappe from?
Mbappe is originally from Cameroon. His father is from Cameroon.
Okay, like the story writes itself. Really? Yeah. Really? You can celebrate him because he's scoring goals for you, but you won't let people from his home country come to study. Okay, thank you.
Mbappe, but nobody else. Sorry, that's how it works.
No, football players who can take us to the World Cup, but nobody. You just run the ball and shut up, right? What is it? Dribble?
Shut up and dribble.
Shut up and dribble. Okay.
Yeah, shut up and dribble. Yeah, face your front. That said, we've come to the end of this week's episode of African News Review. Next week, like I said earlier, Saturday, 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll be doing France Fanon, Black Skin, White Mask, with a special guest, Dr. Michael Henderson. And so join us for that discussion. It promises to be very interesting, shall I say.
Yes.
So, in the course of the week, you can see a recorded version of Agatha Ogiliyama's take on her life and times in Rwanda. And so, Sister Aya,
please like, subscribe, and financially support the work that Adesoji is doing, because you guys know it costs money to be on YouTube. And so...
yeah, costs a pretty penny.
Yep.
Yeah, so... that said, thank you all for coming through, all 50 plus of you. I hope we've been able to share some important information which you can take forward. Again, this information we share here is supposed to be a gateway as opposed to be the end point in itself. So if you want to read more about Kenya's colonial times, Caroline Elkins' Imperial Reckonings 1 on, on the story we just discussed last, which is about Cameroon's financial precarious situation with regards to its institutions. You can read the African last colonial currency, the CFA, and on Cabo Verde, you can do either one of that. So it's the gentleman himself. This one specifically speaks to his upbringing, his ideology and stuff. And the other one talks about his teachings, his speeches, and what have you. So that's Amílcar Cabral in his very pensive mood, thinking about how to solve your problems. Yeah, that said, we've come to the end of this week's episode of African News Review. Next week, I hope to see you all here again. And in the course of the week, I'll see you around, and good night and God bless. Good night.
That's a wrap for this week on the African News Review podcast. We hope you are leaving with a clearer, more truthful picture of Africa. Remember, every story has another side, and we're here to uncover it. Don't forget to join us next Sunday at 12 p.m. Eastern as we continue to challenge the narratives and reclaim Africa's voice. If you've enjoyed the show, be sure to subscribe, share, and leave us a review. Until next time, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep seeing Africa for what it truly is.